Okay.
Alrighty, so we're ready for the second half where we're going to focus on transcripts and college applications and resumes and employment and things like that. And this is one place where I've been doing these workshops for a long time and seeing a lot of preparations of transcripts and course descriptions, and so I'm going to jump in a lot and just tell you different ways people have done that. But I remembered one thing that went out on our publicity. 2 things to remember about homeschooling through high school, and there are 2 things to remember, okay? The first thing that's very relevant to this is have a plan. So know that if your child wants to go to a college that requires 4 years of foreign language, you're thinking about that. The other thing to remember is be flexible and throw out your plans if you need to. So if they really change their mind, don't make somebody do something they don't want to do. And it also means that, you know, if you're an unschooler and you don't want to make a plan that's very rigid, that's fine. And what happens at the end of your free time is hopefully your student decides what they want to do. And if there are certain requirements or things they have to fulfill, then they're inspired to do that, and they go, you know, do whatever math they need to do, study things they need to do. So have a plan. Think about a plan. Don't be somebody who ends up with your child finishing 11th grade and wanting to go to UNH and then suddenly needing to figure foreign language. It's just one that always comes up as foreign language, so I'm so glad you asked about that. But also be really wide open. And kids we know have not gone to college and gone on and done other things. Also, one of our board members was asking me about this. My kids have gone on to college for various majors, and then gotten work in fields not doing anything they learned in college, including my son working for Google. Never did any computer programming in college. It's all completely self-taught. So, and helps to run his own company now. So, you know, I don't know. It's very open-ended. So now we're going to talk about how do we get all these records in order, though, so that your students can apply to college or show papers for a job. I'm not going to go over the record keeping, but let's dive right into the how do you make a transcript or a course description. And I'm going to give a quick little thing first to say colleges in general, and I'll just say colleges, it tends to work for employers too. They didn't even used to want transcripts from homeschoolers because they just said our grades were all whatever we put in. They wanted to see a description of the course. Now there are so many homeschoolers, they like to see the regular format for the transcript, which is usually the course name and a grade, and maybe the number of credits. That can be very vague. It can be a 1 credit course, or if it's something like, you know, playing the piano or something that's taking less time, it's a half a credit, may or may not be necessary. The thing that still is necessary for homeschoolers is a course description. Now, if your child was taking, say, a math class on VLAX, there's a course description there. You can add it to yours. There's going to be a transcript from VLAX. If your student is, you know, reading a lot of books about a subject, you're going to want to write those down and turn it into a course description. You're going to need to think of ways that you can explain what the course was. Colleges know the level of different high schools, so high schools don't have to submit this with their transcripts. They know that Phillips Exeter is one thing and Kingswood High School is another. So you're kind of putting together 2 things here. Mm-hmm. So now Paul Marie's used some different things. How do you do transcripts or course descriptions, or what do you do? and as you're describing, point out to us which records we need to make sure we're keeping so we can get to them from this point.
So this is not my forte. So we go through Colby Academy. Colby Academy, on the really good side, I submit to them what we're taking for classes, what the little description is of the book, etc., and they take care of it all for me. So I really don't have to do too much, with the exception to give them the names of the books and what they're about and what I'm hoping to learn with my children throughout the year. And then Colby, at the end, creates just a typical transcript that you would see from any other high school. And it's all taken care of. I'm good. Today, in fact, my daughter, who is with me, but she's sitting in the car, she has decided she took some time off from graduation and is going to college in the fall. She She hasn't gotten accepted because she hasn't applied yet, but she wants to. So we just had our transcripts. We ordered them from Colby so that they can be sent to the college and she can officially apply. But it's all taken care of. It's just a matter of going online, and it's through a program called Parchment. I'm not sure.
So do you have to submit to them things like grades or test scores or things
I have
like that?
to
Because
submit
sometimes I
their
don't bother
grades
to do the tests, say, in the math book, but we do have
When
to
we
do
first
that.
started with my older kids, every quarter you had to submit so many pieces of examples of work, and then the grades and whatnot. Today, you send so many samples of the work every semester. They look it over. If they don't like it, they're going to let you know. If they're okay with it, you're good. You'll get your report card, so to say, from them, and everything's just all recorded for you.
Now, do you determine the grade, or say, I believe this is a B or an A, or do they?
I determine the grade. I've gotten better with that. The first time we had done it, my oldest son, actually, we got a letter back from Colby because I was grading too hard. Because my attitude was, when you have your midterms, that was your grade, and that affected your semester grade. And I was told, no, you don't have to do that. So I laxed a little bit and realized, okay, I can do things differently. But yeah, it's for me, that's an easier way, because I'm getting everything done. They're telling me what I have to do and what classes that I should be looking at, and it's worked out well because my kids so far have been very fortunate that they finish all their credits and what they need to do by the end of their junior year, and they've been able to use their senior year as an opportunity to get out there and get some experience in whatever they want to do for college.
Typing in Colby so people can see that, and North Atlantic School is another. We've got these NARH. North Atlantic Regional High School. Is that? Is it HS or just HS? I think that's right. There we go.
Could you hard return after that so that we could see it above your head?
So they offer these services. Okay. So Melissa, how did you do? This has to be brief, but
Right.
another transcript workshop.
Right. So Cora also did the dual enrollment with SNHU for her associate's degree program, which she graduated from in May. So we had some of that we had to commingle with all of her other classes that she was taking. So her French and German and violin and all those things. So we had all the course descriptions and everything. And then when it came time for her to do the Common App, I had to become the guidance counselor. And so I had to create a school profile, created the traditional, the traditional transcript, and then also had to have the full-blown course descriptions. So that was how we went about creating everything. Went online and found templates and whatnot, and then plugged in all of the classes that she had taken in their credits, and then the ones that she had taken from the local community colleges, those were put in there as well. So that's how we have gone through.
Okay, and that's sort of similar to what we do. And there's a handout over there, and there's also a link that Amy's put out on Facebook to a page on the Homeschooling Coalition website with the same handouts. But there's a page there called Writing Course Descriptions with some samples. One is how you make a description from, let's see, students' personal interest in study, and here's a list of that astronomy course that I mentioned earlier, all the books and the things my son did. Course description derived from the description of the text in the publisher's catalog. So here's Algebra 2 and the little blurb describing it in the Saxon math catalog of the time. And then just saying, so that's the course, and the textbook is Saxon Algebra 2. A course description from a teen activity. We've had a teen high school book group in our area for many, many years. So I have that in my kids' course description. Says literature discussion group, and says it provides an opportunity for teens to read these books and discuss them. They read books once a month, and it lists the titles of the books and the short stories for that year. And by the end of 4 years, it's about 8 books and a play, 4 short stories every year. They really stack up, so it's a really good English program. So it's a good academic activity as opposed to some of the other things, cheerleading, that you list as an extracurricular activity. So those are ways to write course descriptions. Colleges do not want to get 40 pages of papers from you. In general, you'll see most of our course descriptions fill up maybe a page and a half of a Word document, something like that. So write enough, list the texts and things, any special activities or field trips, but don't say too much. You don't, you know,
And the schools will contact you if they have a question on something that you've done. Because I know we've had that as well. St. A's, when my son had applied there, they had a question in one of the classes. And even though, yes, we had it done by Colby, there were some things that we had created on our own and they still had that question, so.
yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Be sort of open about it. I wasn't really sure where to slide this in, but I think as we get into now what you're actually putting on the transcript, I'm going to go into this paper that says some graduation and admissions requirements. This is something interesting to think about. I put this together last summer, but I doubt it's changed very much. So I have a list there, New Hampshire high schools, the minimum. Homeschoolers are not required to do any of this. We have a list of subjects in the home education law that we have to teach, but we don't have to teach them every year. They include U.S. history and the history of the U.S. Constitution, so you don't have to do that every year. So there's nothing specific. You don't have to do this, but it gives you a sense of what they're doing at your local public school. So they are doing English 4 credits, or that is 4 years of English, math 3 credits, including an algebra 1, physical sciences, I mean that might be physics, or it might be earth science, or it might be just some science class that you make up, whatever. This gives you a sense of what they're looking for. Now, here's the interesting thing with colleges, and this is why I also meant make a plan. You know a little bit about your child, and if they want to go to college, what sort of level college you might be looking at. So here's UNH. It's our, middle of the road school here. So 4 years of English, 3 years of math, including algebra 1, 2, and geometry. 3 years of science, 2 must be a lab science. If you're a homeschooler, a lot of programs have simple labs you can do at home. You do want to write a lab report. Some colleges actually want to see the lab reports. So, you don't want to be lying about this. You don't want to be making up, oh, it was a lab science, but we just watched a few videos. There are things you can do at home, and it's really a lot of fun. There are also videos you can watch of labs at home that are also very enlightening. So 3 years of science, 3 years social science, 2 years at least, or 3 of a foreign language. So if you've got a sort of middle-of-the-road, college-bound kid who maybe wants to even go to engineering school or this or that, you may be wanting to aim for that. Now, then the ever-popular now SNHU is kind of vague. They're saying 4 years of English, 3 or more years of mathematics, but it doesn't have to be at a certain level, science, this and that. Now here's their thing. If the homeschool program is not accredited, which most of us do not have a program that's accredited, if you use a service like Colby, as Paula Marie does, you get accreditation for your coursework. So that's something to keep in mind. The SNHU says you have to submit a portfolio, including course descriptions, an annotated reading list, and graded work for review. That seems sort of odd. I mean, it seems harder than UNH, and my kids have gone to schools like Cornell and Connecticut College, and they don't ask you for that kind of thing. Sometimes I think this happens because sometimes the schools that are a little lower ranking get kids applying who don't have all their things in order, all their ducks in a row, and they want to see that the material is good. Now you can jump up to Dartmouth and Yale, and there are no specific courses even listed. They just want to see that it's rigorous. That's why you're making a course description and a list of the textbooks. Then, of course, you're putting grades on there, and you say, well, how do they know whether to believe the grades or not? That's why you take SAT 2 subject tests, or you can take AP tests or other things. But SAT subject tests are quickie, easy, 1-hour tests in the subject that kind of confirm, oh yes, that was an A in chemistry. Well, that was a B in chemistry. chemistry. Well, this is a C in chemistry, but it's a real solid chemistry course. Because, you know, to be completely honest, they're not going to believe mom's A, B's, and C's. So it's something to keep in mind. Now, we have questions every year. At the bottom you see, notice how it gets more vague. Empire B School. There's also a couple of the commercial driver's license tractor trailer driving schools. They demand, we want to see this kind of a diploma, we want a GED, we want this, we won't accept anything else. Sometimes you can talk to people like me at the New Hampshire Homeschooling Coalition, we can talk to the school, say, the state does not issue diplomas to us, we have this and this and this, they can give you this, will you accept it? And we talk them down. But what I'm trying to point out to you here is the funny thing. The Ivy Leagues hardly require anything. UNH requires a certain amount of stuff. SNHU wants to see your whole portfolio, and Empire Beauty School won't even take your diploma or your anything unless you go and get a GED. So it can be a little confusing. It's just the kind of applications they're getting.
Well, what we found was when Cora knew what colleges she wanted to apply to, she went to the schools and she went up and she spoke to all of the admission counselors herself, and they always have a homeschool dedicated counselor, and determined what she, you know, what they were looking for, and then she was like, well, I can provide you this, and they said, that's great. And the vast majority of them recommended strongly, because a lot of the schools don't require SATs any longer unless you're like going into one, you know, for example, nursing was, I think, Stonehill's the only required nursing to have the SAT. So that they can use that to slot your student in with the other students. And then they use it for merit scholarships and things like that as well. So that was the biggest thing that we were recommended to do was the SATs, because that then kind of validated everything that we were going to be presenting. But she really drove that, going and having the conversations, going and saying this is what we can provide you. That really helped the whole process with all the schools that she was interested in.
And it's really good in a way to call the schools and offer first rather than say, well, we don't have an English and a math teacher who can write a recommendation because I'm that person, what could we do? Call them up and say, well, we have a theater teacher she's been with for 4 years. And we have, you know, a coach of blah, blah, blah team, and then they've been employed here. Can we give you that instead? And then they usually say yes. And that SAT question has come up recently because I think it was UNH just said, oh, we don't require SATs. But if you go to their admissions page and their homeschool admissions page, they do require it for homeschoolers. So just be aware of that kind of thing. So I was going to ask about tests, and I do have a couple books to show. One of the questions that we ask is, so did your kids take SATs or PSATs or anything like that? And when did they take them, or how did you do that kind of thing? So Paula Marie, how about you? Did you do some of that?
So I had a couple of little comments.
Okay.
My older boys took the PSATs, SATs, and the ACTs. My two oldest, we were living in Florida at the time, and the attitude down there is you're a homeschooler, your grades can't be right, you've made them as your parents' grades. And it was a very interesting process down there in comparison to what it is up here. Up here, my son also took the PSAT and the SAT. I don't believe he took the ACT. We didn't have any problems. He went to SNU, and now I don't know if because Colby's accredited we didn't have any problems, but he was in the honor program and got scholarships, and we didn't have any other problems. And I am aware of other homeschoolers that have gone through there, and I have not heard of that request of them needing to show everything. So I'm not sure.
How
I'm not
that
sure
works.
if that's.
Well, you and most of your children were in the early college program through VLAX and SNHU. So did that just sort of slide them right in? There wasn't any particular, you didn't have to show a portfolio because.
No, I did. I had to send our high school transcript with proof of things that I graded to show her work from my classes as well as. But not for the regular program, just to finish off the associate's degree program. The regular program we did not. No, we just sent the regular portfolio and everything that was sent to all the other schools.
But at that point, with Melissa's daughter going to SNHU, she had already completed 2 years of college during high school.
Yeah, but you know, they don't talk to each other. So the
Oh.
regular admissions, yeah, that you say, oh, my daughter, and they're like, what? Yeah, no, they don't even know, they're probably sitting next to each other, I don't know, in the same room. But so it wasn't, there wasn't that conversation going on between them where they would look at her and go, oh, we're seeing that you took these classes already with us, and they're our classes. So that was, you thought it would have been
Yeah.
easier, yeah.
Now,
but
did she take PSATs or SATs a junior year or senior or
We
any
did
of
not
that
do
kind of thing?
PSATs. No, she did the SATs, gosh, she did the May of her junior year. She took it just to kind of get the nerve thing, because she's got a lot of anxiety around test taking.
I think anybody, it's always
Yeah,
good to just realize that no matter what.
so we kind of did it, so she would
Things
kind of
like
get the
that.
feel of having to go into her high school that she had never been in before, and sit down at this desk and all that. And then she took them again in the fall for the real time, so yeah. But she didn't do ACT, she didn't do a PSAT.
So, Marie, when did your children, did they do a SAT, the ones who took SATs, did they do that in their junior year? Did they do it again their senior year?
I want to say 2 of them took them junior and senior year, just to see what the differences would be. And one of them had an attitude like, I used to have tests, can't deal with this, and this was good enough.
Yeah.
So he took his junior year.
Well, the general sequence for kids planning on going to college or any sort of competitive college. PSATs sometimes in the fall of your junior year, although as a homeschooler, you have to go in and take it at the school during the week. It's kind of a pain. A lot of us have given up on that. But the SAT, which is the one that's, well, now the SAT and ACT are pretty much interchangeably accepted. But you see the SAT used more in the East and in California. The ACT was used more in the Midwest, that's why. And then there's a new classical learning test, and I've got that listed on the handout of resources. Usually though, if your child wants to go to a competitive college, or if they're nervous, or, I mean, my second child, my daughter, got a terrible nosebleed in the middle of the SAT, and they wouldn't tell her where the bathroom was, so she missed a whole section of the test, okay? So if your child takes a junior year, then they can go take it again in the fall of their senior year, at which point their score almost always goes up between 20 and 50 points, just because they've done it before, they're a little more mature, and if something happens, like they get injured, they get a cold or whatever, you have a couple of chances. If you wait until, November of senior year, that can be a little tricky. Then you keep in mind too, if you want to take some of these subject tests, you can take 3 of them at a time, so you test for 3 hours, 3 different ones, an hour each. That would be on a different date. So if you did that on the SAT date in October, it's usually the first Saturday, then you could still take the SAT in November, or vice versa. But there are only so many dates, So you want to be going to College Board and looking at deadlines and things like that.
Not just deadlines for the SATs, but like Cora knew some of the schools that she wanted to apply to, and some of them have early applying, early decision. So they have ongoing enrolling, and they have multiple dates. So if they're dead set, like I'm definitely going to the school, this is where I want to go, then they want to be all ready to go and apply that first round to show that they're going to commit once they get that acceptance letter. So that's something to consider too. You don't want to be waiting until October or November to take the SATs, and then November 15th was that deadline for you to submit to Stonehill or wherever, because you wanted that moment to get yourself in there. So that's another thing to consider when you're looking at those SAT deadlines.
Yeah, so dig around the site. And know that if your kid knows what to expect on the test, that's a good thing. So get test prep books. As long as the SAT has changed format a few times in recent years, particularly the essay part. But you can usually get these books at your local library. You just want to make sure you have one that's recent enough. The librarians are probably savvy enough that they're getting rid of the SAT prep books that apply to an SAT no longer given. What we do is we do a little bit of these a few days a week for a couple months out from the test. There are other handy books. Up Your Score is popular, with a few tricks on how to see what they're really trying to ask you in those comprehension questions, how to write a good essay, and usually homeschoolers share these around and they're handy. And on the subject of just these different things, Homeschooling for College Credit, this is a very interesting book that's relatively new. Lots of things about community college classes, CLEP tests, which are a way to place out of classes at colleges, or APs. I do want to mention, though, if your child is interested in competitive colleges, you know, Ivies, baby Ivies, elite schools, they're not going to place out of many classes, but it looks good on their application, something like that. And the famous Homeschooler's Guide to Portfolios and Transcripts, which is getting to be an old book now and isn't even published anymore, but it's kind of handy. We'll have more information on making transcripts on the Coalition website, but so I guess you're getting the idea that keep track of things, make a description, look up testing things, because it's one, as much as we may all hate testing, it's one way to just confirm the grades you gave, or adjust them accordingly, or, you know, think about your local high school. There are some kids in a really tough level English class. That A is different than the kids who are in a different level English class. Maybe your kid's not the super brightest, but they're still getting an A for what they're doing, and maybe they're going to be applying to Great Bay Community College, which is different than the kid who wants to apply to Dartmouth. So your grades are fine. Look at the SAT scores, even in a practice book, and get a sense of where they stand. Then you can see the average scores at certain colleges and other kinds of programs, and see, oh, I think my kid fits in here, or my kid fits in there, and get more of a sense of that.
The SAT books also, there's practices online that you can
Yes.
take, so you don't
See,
have to
exactly.
purchase the
Yeah,
book.
Khan Academy has all the latest ones on there as well.
Right.
Yeah.
What I like about the book is there's often a little chapter that you can just read and work through on the reading test, instead of having to watch the very slow lecture. But all the practice tests are online, and they're the exact same ones that are in the books. And there is a program, it's listed on the resources, by a nonprofit organization called Modern States, that is trying to do first year of college free for American students, to try to reduce debt and things like that. They offer prep for CLEP tests, college level, oh gosh, I've got to check the abbreviation. They will pay for students' fees to take the test. So for many middle-of-the-road state colleges, your student can go and take CLEP tests every year and can place out of several years of college, and then you're only paying for a few years there, so that's kind of an interesting thing. What about letters of recommendation? The standard thing is they say something like, you know, from a science teacher and a humanities teacher, or the guidance counselor report. How did you do those things, Paula Marie?
One thing I'll recommend, make your child be responsible for the things that have to be done. Don't take it on yourself. Make them do it, because they're the ones that are going to school.
Yeah.
And once they get into college, the schools aren't talking to you, they're talking to the kids. Because they're 18 in most cases and they're the adult. So when it comes to doing those things, my son was responsible, my sons were responsible. My daughter, she has disabilities, so I'm trying to guide her a little bit more, but it's still, you want to do this, you need to figure it out, because I did that years ago. So
Yeah. Recommendations. So how did you find
for
those?
recommendations, going with the most recent, my youngest son that went through school, he just, through the different internships and volunteer work that he did, he went to the supervisors and the people he worked with to write recommendations. And the people that knew him, I think he used a couple of, we had a math teacher that was retired, they got to know each other well, and she did a recommendation. But your kids are always meeting people and doing things, and you know, read to us, because in most cases it's an honor. They think it's great.
And did you have a guidance? Did you fill in the school guidance counselor report or some recommendation like that? I know I've done that in the past.
I honestly don't remember.
Okay, yeah.
So,
And sometimes I've also included, I think Melissa mentioned that, maybe you're going to more school profile. That says something like, we homeschool for these reasons, we like this and this and this about it, we live in a rural community, my children have a mix of friends with different backgrounds and different this and that. A nice little thing that.
I know. Yeah, so the Common
Kind of
App, yeah,
recommendations.
that was, so, yep, Cora, same thing, she went and, you know, asked the, people in her life for the recommendations. There was no real specific, like it has to be a, you know, an English teacher or this teacher at any of the schools that she had applied to.
Okay.
So she did ask Mrs. Hardy, who had been doing her evaluations all those years. So she wrote one, I think someone that she was doing for Girl Scouts, and then I think, you know, I think maybe her dance teacher. So she went and did that, but yes, I had to do the guidance counselor thing, and I was like, okay. And then when you hit the submit button, I'm like, you can't go back and make any changes. I'm like, great, if you don't get into college, kid, it's all down to my guidance counselor report. But then I was texting Steph, they want a school profile. What is a school profile?
Oh, yeah.
So then I had to create that, and you're right, it was saying, you know, I gave the bios of the teachers, so they could get an understanding of what was the level of, so yes, they were learning writing, but who were they learning it from, and what was our backgrounds.
Yeah.
And so I kind of got into a little bit of that as well.
Yeah, and senses of what we do, you know, that we have a book group or a debate club or something like that is
Yeah.
helpful. A lot of the schools my kids have applied to have required a recommendation from, you know, like an English or humanities teacher and a science or a math. So then, and in general, the rule is you don't want to be calling the admissions office, but I think as a homeschooling parent, sometimes you have to. So I usually make the first phone call, but only the first phone call, because I know they're writing down that mom called, but I say, I'm so sorry, I'm calling. We're a homeschooling family and a homeschooling parent, so I'm the guidance counselor. So in that sense, I am calling you. We would like to give you, you know, the theater director and the fencing club, or the, you know, is that okay? And then they usually say, fine, but sometimes it helps to make a phone call. Ever since my very first child was applying, which was in 2002, I've called colleges and they've said, oh, we love homeschoolers. So they usually do love homeschoolers. They've been responsible kids on campus and they do well, and so don't be afraid to ask them, you know. I also wanted to ask about what are your kids, okay, you have one who's going into college. What are your kids doing now? Are they doing things that they studied in college? How did it all work out for you?
So I look at it as each of my children have been successful in their own ways. My oldest does computer security.